Okay, are we broadcasting?
That hasn't made it in yet.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you indeed. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Local Democratic Framework Subcommittee on the 20th of February 2023. Members, there are no members of the public in attendance. I do have the evacuation procedure. Are you happy to note it?
Right.
Thank you very much indeed. Apologies for absence or members away on official council business.
We haven't received any apologies. However, I do understand that Councillor Osborne is still unwell.
Okay, Councillor Osborne done well, thank you.
We send him our best wishes for a speedy recovery.
Can do. Always nice to see Michael. Members, disclosure of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests? Not declared. That takes us on to agenda item number 5, which is the minutes of the Local Development Framework Subcommittee held on the 4th of January, a copy of which is in your pack. Can we please do
Correction, Chair, it's agenda item number 4.
What did I say?
5.
5, did I? I'm flying along, Tony. I can't help myself. 4, agenda item number 4.
Now, can we?
Thank you for that. Right, members, yeah, it's page 4.1 in the pack, I believe. Can we do them for accuracy to start with, which is page 1 and page 2? Is everybody happy that they are a true and accurate record of the meeting? Thank you very much indeed. Are you happy for me to sign them? Thank you very much indeed. Good. Right, and now we're on to agenda item number 5. Which is the South Warwickshire Local Plan Issues and Options Consultation Document, not Solihull. So, David, pleasure to see you here to speak about Solihull. Harry.
Yeah, I can't talk about Solihull, but I'll miss it tonight and do it again another time.
Right, how are we going to present this? Dot, Michael, are you going to?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, good evening, councillors. I'll deal with the main issues. Dorothy will come in at the end of my minor presentation just to give you some further information. Basically, what we're looking at here is the South Warwickshire Issues and Options document. Just to clarify, it's not a stage of the local plan process where you would normally have formal direct objections and representations for or against specific proposals. It's actually an element of an invite, and they want our views and our comments and whether we support or don't support the options they're putting forward or the approaches they're considering. So you will see in Appendix 1 a fairly detailed series of questions and options that they provided us. Many of these options and the issues they highlight are fairly detailed for Warwick and Stratford in terms of the South Warwickshire area specific. So I've tended to say the comments fairly straightforward, no comment or no further reference or concern highlighted. And where we have evidence or experience from our own local plan process, which as members will more than be aware of through the examination, raised a number of issues that we had to address. I've raised those as points that I feel South Warwickshire local plan would be advisable or would be advised to consider. So that's the meat of the document, but there are, despite the fact that I've mentioned general support for the approach and comments on the issues and options, there are a number of strategic areas that do have and will have implications for North Warwickshire. And those are the main issues that I've covered in the board reports. But I would like to just run through the main 3 ones I think that members will, if not be aware of, will have interest in. The main initial one, if we go to the employment area, and it's referred to in the board report in paragraph 3.5, but it's also referred to in my responses to issues and options questions E1 and E7, which I believe is on page 17.
15 and 16 of the pack.
15 and 16. In E1, our response is general support, because the question is really to do with, are they taking the approach to employment as identified in the HEDNA? Is that a good option to take or not? Yes, it is. And we are taking that approach. You members would have seen the HEDNA recently.
Well, can you just remind everybody, well, I know you
Sorry.
did it last week,
The
remind
HEDNA
everybody what
is-
about the HEDNA?
The Housing and Employment Development Needs Assessment. So it's a direct document that looks at the needs of the Coventry-Warwickshire area in terms of employment needs and housing needs. Obviously, from the reference E1, we are talking about strategic employment needs. And you will see that the South Warwickshire Issues and Options document does address that, because it does make reference to it. Interestingly, however, as I spoke earlier with Dorothy, it makes reference, and I had identified it in italics in the centre of 3.5, to the need to address employment allocations. And they made reference specifically to the amount from HEDNA, which is 709 hectares, and that that's will have to be delivered in Coventry, Warwickshire. But they then go on to say, and I think this is probably part of the critical issue, whilst new employment land allocations along the strategic road network do lend themselves well to logistics, and it's logistics the issue I'm going to come on to, I know that there would be interest from occupiers. This is within the South Warwickshire area. Such activities would fail to maximise the economic potential of South Warwickshire and fail to capitalise on the strengths of the existing sectors and skills of the workforce. So as an issue, we believe that the Issues and Options document is not adequately or appropriately addressing the issue that they themselves have highlighted. There's a 709 strategic employment, which includes logistics, need addressed, and it's not clear in my understanding of having read the document that this is really going to be addressed in any way. They do make reference to their core strategic sites or core improvement sites. That could be areas we target strategic employment to. But this comes on to a further point, which is in E7, where they have made reference to the Gaydon Jaguar Land Rover site just off the M40. Given that we've already seen the information that they accept the HEDNA, that there is a significant need, 709, that needs to be addressed, they make specific reference to that site that it is not appropriate to consider logistics. My comment in the response would be, and this is the one I had made to E7, is that in my eyes, it's perfectly appropriate to the potential for logistics in that site, given that the automotive industry may well be particularly well related to the needs of logistics. So I don't think it's been adequately addressed. So that's the first issue. There is a further recommendation we would probably ask members to consider, and I'll bring that in at the end, but I do want to cover the other two issues as well. So primarily, Issues and Options isn't addressing the sub-regional need for logistics. It isn't addressing specifically a need on one of their core improvement sites, which we think it could be potentially. But to be honest, we're not worried where, just that they address the issue, so it is accommodated. But also, and I add this to the Issues and Options, in our experience, it is something that you can't ignore, that you have to address when they do the local plan, because we have to address it. We have to have a sub-regional employment need in case you get a speculative application coming forward. And basically, I believe that that issue isn't even identified as an option. So that is a part of it, the issue I'm coming to in terms of additional information. The second issue highlighted is obviously one that you're aware of, which is Chichi and Travellers site provision.
Could we just do them individually? So could we do the B8 question?
Yes,
So members, does everybody follow the point that Mike has outlined there in terms of the HEDNA, which we discussed at the last meeting, the recommendation that there would be, when we saw the last report, 749 hectares, but that for all distribution, if you remember, the previous report was it looked as though it was saying it should all go in North Warwickshire, but that was, we were assured by Dorothy, more of a layout issue than a strategic intention. So clearly we've seen the first shots with this consultation document where we've got South Warwickshire making specific reference to their belief that they do not feel that their skill set is suited to distribution economy. Mike is obviously going to respond to that, but members, have you got any views that you'd like to share with Mike and Dorothy about South Warwickshire's position? Yeah, Jackie?
Well, no, I'll let the others go because they might want to say, well, does that mean they're not going to take any B8 in terms of hectares, essentially, as a borough?
It's not clear, Jackie. Sorry, it's Councillor James. It's not. That's the issue. They make specific reference to the header, to the strategic employment need, but they then go on to say that they believe, particularly for Gaydon, that's not appropriate. But broadly, and I think that comment is fairly obvious, they're talking strategic land allocations on the strategic road network do lend themselves well to logistics. So we're talking M42, M40. And no doubt there will be interest from occupiers, so they know the pressure is there. Such activities would fail to maximise the economic sectors and skills of the workforce. Now it's not saying exactly no, but it's a fairly blunt comment that they don't believe logistics will be part and parcel of their element of addressing that 709 hectares, which raises the concerns that we believe it should be part and parcel. And it's not clear from this that they believe that.
How nice for them.
That's very good of them, isn't it? What's called playing a blinder, I think. Mark?
I think, I'm trying hard to avoid being too blunt with this, particularly with because but issue E7 contains a number of these locations. University of Warwick main campus area. I can understand that that's fair enough. South of Coventry, including Coventry Airport, Coventry Gateway, and the National Battery Innovation Centre. I really don't see why logistics isn't appropriate there. Strikes me as absolutely appropriate given what it is. It's on the edge of Coventry. Coventry Airport, that's classic for logistics. Wellesbourne, including the University of Warwick and Wellesbourne Airfield. Okay, there may not be a major motorway there, but there is a decent road network. And with the airfield at Wellesbourne, I would have said that is. Long Marston area, including the Marston Rail Innovation Centre. Are they saying that you can't have logistics next door to railway sites? Yeah, I would have thought that was by far a more appropriate site. Okay, you need to get the traffic away from the rail centre, but that there is a huge development area at Long Marston. Stoneleigh, including Stoneleigh Park Agricultural Science Park. Well, that's next door to a huge road. It's entirely appropriate for logistics. And then the last one, Gaydon M40 Junction 12. Everything we have heard from developers is that motorway junctions are the particularly interesting sites for logistics centres. I just think this comment in their report that frankly they're too posh for logistics beggars belief, and they need to get real and start sharing the load. It's simply not acceptable for South Warwickshire to say it's okay to stick logistics in North Warwickshire, but our workforce, frankly, it's not suitable. Thank you very much, dear boy.
David?
Well, I was going to say some of that actually. Thanks for letting me speak. But if I think about, they spent over 20 million on Junction 12 with a dual carriageway that runs up past Jaguar Land Rover and Aston Martin. They put a relief road down through Kyneton and that sort of area. And then when I start looking at the amount of stuff they're spending on roads, I know Junction 14 takes you into South Warwickshire, or South Warwick as well, and there's quite a lot of science parks on that south side there, and Volvo's technical centre and Jaguar's got a technical centre there. But they're looking to spend £100 million on the 429, which is a very nice bypass to stop the great unwashed driving through Stafford, unless they want to visit it. Stratford, should I say. So just 3 little developments that I know of that are going through the process are going to spend more than we're going to spend on our bit of the A5. And then if I look at like the bits that you're saying there in terms of rail transport and everything, it's a motorway exit. If we've got to take the pain because it's got a motorway exit, they should be part of that same pain.
And let's be clear, the M40 is a key arterial route leading to London and the south. So how can you not have a distribution economy based on a key arterial route? Jackie?
So I was wondering if those points that have just been made by Councillor Simpson and Councillor Humphreys may be added to our response. It may be that it's too detailed and it's a sort of when the local plan is formed and we are formally consulted, but it just strikes me that the specific comments that have been made about this opportunity and suitability of those areas might be included and added to our response at this point in time, so that we're showing the groundwork, if you like, for your challenge.
Yes, Chair, that's basically what we're looking for to some extent. We're more than happy to accommodate. I mean, we will have to word it obviously in this is a suggestion, this is an option you need to cover. But in E7, I think I covered it in a little bit of detail. It would be similar to the reference I made to Gaydon Area M40, should not be excluded as a potential opportunity for strategic logistic uses. The main motorway junctions have previously been highlighted within the regional strategic employment studies as having clear potential and as being appropriate locations for strategic logistic uses. In this circumstance, I'm talking about the site as clear cross-linkage and economic supply relationships between the logistic uses and the adjoining automotive or manufacturing and development activities. I could reinforce that for Stonelinton and the activities that go on there, and appropriately for the Coventry Airport site, because both would similarly apply. And such uses should not be seen as, I put it in inverted commas because I'm trying to be nice, mutually exclusive in policy or location terms in these strategic locations, which I think Councillor Simpson was putting fairly clearly then. So I'm happy to expand on that and make reference to the others. I suppose I focused on the Gaydon one because they were so explicit in Gaydon, whereas they were a little bit grayer in the other areas. With the Gaydon area M40, they were more explicit, saying we will not accommodate B8 uses at this location. And I just thought that was a little bit too far.
And then with the comments about the rail innovation centre at Longmarston, do we know what that is? Is that a rail freight terminal or is that something different?
Super trains, isn't it? Fast trains.
Well, it's a siding on the edge of the old Longmarston airfield, isn't it? But they're trying to develop it.
Well, is it a rail freight terminal though, or is it?
I don't believe it is. I believe it's more like Myra. It is a innovation centre for research and development.
It's fast trains.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. As long as it's not a freight junction.
But I think the point is, Chair, it's an active rail hub that is on a relatively underused railway line at the minute, and they could use rather more of it.
Okay, so is there any comment that can be made, Mike, that could bring out the potential of the value? Because we know that the government 5 years ago were doing national strategic call for sites for rail freight terminals. Indeed, Hams Hall came forward, as did Birch Coppice.
I think Councillor Simpson's comment is perfectly apt. It's an active rail hub, which obviously on a quiet line, which could still accommodate further strategic growth or future strategic growth. Because don't forget, we are speaking quite a way in the future now. If we're looking at the issues and options, even if we see the South Yorkshire Issue and Option Plan progress very quickly because the emerging NPPF changes, there's a deadline to have that document done within the current local plan process by, I think it's 2025. So that's the earliest it would get to examination. You'd be looking at least another year or two before it would get to final adoption. So you're looking at 2027, 28. And, we're looking at that 5 years ahead now. It could be potentially longer. And the current situation with regards to transport changes, it could be it may have been identified as a significant potential through other documents. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, well, here's an opportunity. Exactly as Councillor Simpson said, they've been asking for opportunities. Well, has this been considered?
Okay, is everybody happy with that?
Can I just ask one more question, Chair? Can you only look at what's in front of it? I'm not sure. I'm just thinking now, if I come down the A45 from the A46, all the way down effectively to Tolpuddle underpass as it is now, everything on the right-hand side there is like a moonscape where they're levelling the ground and it's industrial, all behind Guy Salmon, that area. Are you familiar where I'm talking about?
Vaguely.
So if you carry on down the A45, got the right-hand side now, site is completely been developed, but for access to the motorway, down the A45, M45, junction 17 on the M1, or down the A46, junction 14 onto the M40. Can we only look at what's, I'm just thinking about stuff that's maybe in Coventry rather than South Warwickshire. And I bet you're talking about significant hundreds of acres or hectares being converted into industrial area right next door to the area that they're talking about.
Well, it's perfectly reasonable for us to identify reasonably well-related sites, exactly as similar situation that we have ourselves. So, for instance, let's take a housing similar housing situation. We looked at the sustainable urban extension of Birmingham as part of the local plan. We looked at a completely isolated piece of land that wasn't particularly well related to anything in North Warwickshire, but it was very well related to emerging development in Birmingham. So we allocated it, not particularly significant, but in terms of our housing numbers, reasonably large, 120, 151 houses, which is the Wishaw development at the top. So we made the issues an option approach that we would look at adjoining development needs, but also adjoining development. So that would make sense if those locations are reasonably close to the South Warwickshire border. That's an option that they should look at, or because it's not really an issue, it's an option they should consider. Because the issue is, how are you going to address the 709 hectares identified in Edna? Here's an option that you should include. And then that would then potentially, in theory, end up with a planning policy similar to our own that says we will accommodate development on the edge of our border, even though it may not have anything relationship within our border, but it has a direct relationship with something outside our border, and that makes sustainable sense. So we don't look at yourself in isolation, inwardly, look outwardly, and that would make a good point.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any more comments? So, Doc, we briefly discussed adding a third recommendation to the report.
Thank you, members. Yes, it was more to sort of reinforce the comments within the committee report, because that will be going with the responses made in the appendix. And it was just really to clarify and bring out that point that maybe we felt we hadn't really made strong enough within the recommendations itself. And the additional recommendation was recommendation C as follows. For the South Warwickshire local plan, to include a policy on strategic employment and provision for logistics. And it was fairly simple. This is an issue you haven't covered, and it's an option you haven't provided for.
Okay, is everybody happy with that?
Well, I'm happy with the principle, but I prefer it to be a bit stronger than that. You know, for me, it's about being a good neighbour. You know, the government's talking about removing the duty to cooperate. And one item I'm going to talk about a bit later on is no questions on housing issue H4. I'm wary that they seem to be moving away from agreements that they've already entered into. I think, you know, looking at the regional economy as a whole, we need to be fairly robust in saying to South Warwickshire, look, you know, you have to share your burden. This is just going too far. You're either part of the UK or you're not. And you've got a strategic site, a strategic motorway running through your area and strategic sites, and you should be attempting to use them properly. As much as anything to protect the greenbelt in other parts of the region, but also to stimulate economic growth. I don't think they're doing either.
So how would that recommendation then be enhanced?
need to think about. I'd just rather we put stronger words in to make it clear that actually we think this is just not acceptable.
Jackie?
So I'm just a bit lost. I've got two recommendations in front of me.
Yeah.
I heard Mike say
Four.
there'd be a third one. Sorry?
Yeah, so 2 recommendations is printed, and then because of the significance of the
Earlier
BA
point.
question,
Yes.
it's about adding a third.
Oh, right, okay.
Mike and Dot had come up with a provisional recommendation C, which
Where is that? Have I missed it?
No, it's not on there. It's just
Oh, okay.
we're recommending it now.
Oh, okay.
which was to include a requirement that South Warwickshire include a policy on strategic employment provision for distribution. But Mark's point is that's a bit too light. It needs to be far stronger than that. And not just say include a policy, but meet your obligations.
It's set out how it will meet the requirements for 708.
And Chairman, I can't think of words now. I'm quite happy for you, the opposition spokesman and our officers to work together on it.
That's it. So it's meet obligations in terms of sharing both the benefits and
Commitments.
negatives the wrong word. But what did you say, Jackie?
Commitments to.
And commitments of the head.
So, Chair, if I could just add, I'm taking some of Councillor Simpson's words as well. Effectively, it we included in the South Warwickshire Plan to quote, reflect the strategic network within the borough. Add that to it before you go on to include a provision, a policy on strategic employment provision and for logistics. So
Okay, so delegated to myself, Mark and Dorothy to agree.
One question, Chairman. We're often told that we have to have provision here for lorry parks and what have you, because of our proximity to Felixstowe and the North Sea ports. How close is Gate, that area, to the south, to Bristol and the South Warwick ports?
It's 38 miles from here, David.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, but it's not only coming south, it's north going south as well.
I agree, but if you like, we are
So it's 3 hours from.
seem to be getting issues that we need to provide for
That's an interesting
lorry parks and all the rest of it. They must be a similar proximity to the Welsh and Bristol, West Indian ports. And have they got any provision in here for Western relaxation for lorries as well as logistics sites? Because they need to pick up the slack on both of those. It's not just the logistics site; it's the provision for lorry parks as well.
Good point.
I agree, Chair. I don't recall seeing anything within there specifically on lorry parking, and Dorothy's just confirmed there's nothing in, so we can add that to the.
See, Michael, you see how valuable members are? It's always good to have a reminder, isn't it?
I don't know whether that was a compliment or not.
Chair, Dorothy's helpfully highlighted issue 2 at T3, where it could be added. That's on page 28 of the 31 in the appendix. And this is to do with basically option for more sustainable road-based transport for businesses and to encourage more sustainable road-based transport for business. I'd taken that was more to do with the type of transport they were providing, whether it be electronic, hydrogen energy, whatever. But I think it could be quite appropriate to add it in there in issue T3.
Sounds sensible. Is everybody happy with that? All right. Yeah, well done. So we'll have let's just be clear then, we'll include a comment and some feedback about what are you doing about lorry parks.
Yes.
And that would be to manage, our view is those lorry parks are managing the distribution of freight and other materials. Yeah. Okay, everybody agree with that?
Yeah, I thought smart cities was them being smart about dumping everything on everybody else.
I think it is, Dave. I mean, I just repeat that conversation we had about the nature of this document and then the Reg 18 and the Reg 19, just so as members are clear about at what point it becomes fisticuffs.
Well, this is very, very much the initial stage of the issues and options. So this is just broad brush, just seeing what the comments back that you would get in terms of the consultation. The next stage would then be producing a draft local plan, and that would be the Regulation 18 situation. And again, that would be the first time that you perhaps see the actual policies themselves in terms of that. So you would perhaps make some comments and say again if they've missed something or whatever. It is at that stage where it is an objection, but it isn't until the next stage, the Regulation 19, which is the version of the plan that they would want to then submit to the Secretary of State. And it's the most important stage of making a representation. However, with a lot of these issues that you're raising this evening, it's often really good to get those initial comments in at this stage, even if it is, what have you thought about, you're missing this or you're missing that and things like that.
Yeah.
Because at least then you've got that order that we have raised these issues throughout the process.
Okay, fabulous. Right.
Just comment just slightly further on what Dot has said. That just first to echo that point that if there does come a point where there's a formal process where we want to challenge this in greater detail, the fact it's been raised at the earliest opportunity and we've done all we can to steer them to address these issues will be relevant. And secondly, I just want to make us, when you consider the final version of the addition to the resolution, that it should be a delegation to Mike. If the wording is not agreed by the subcommittee tonight, to comply with the Local Government Act 1972, we have to give the delegation to Mike in consultation with yourself and Councillor Chambers, because you can't give the delegation specifically to the member, but obviously you'll be involved in the process and forming that response. It's just to make sure that we go through the action.
Okay, is everybody happy then that it's a delegation to Mike and Dot and then myself and Jackie?
Except I'm not the shadow spokesperson, so it's Councillor Osborne that's. But I'm happy to talk to Mike about what's been discussed tonight.
Right. Have we got any other comments about distribution networks, lorries? No? Okay then, Michael, do you want to take us on to travellers and the showman community?
I have comments on some of the policies that occurred before that, but I'm having to raise them now. It just struck me that there are a higher H number than the ones I wanted to comment on.
I'm happy to take it now, Chair, or we'll just run through the initial comment on the Egyptian travellers and the final one, but I'm easy.
Well, I'm sure I'm going to.
Is it fitting a theme?
Comments on gypsies and travellers.
Sure.
But before we get to gypsies and travellers, there are two H category comments. One is as far as how they're catering for the needs of the elderly. And I am acutely aware that within Warwickshire as a whole, we have a real shortage of specialist elderly accommodation, and particularly care homes, high dependency units as well as low dependency units. I'm not sure of what it is they are proposing, but whatever it is they're proposing, I'd just like to be sure that they put an adequate amount in. We did. And I'm sure when we get round to the next iteration of our plan, we will need to specifically address the needs. Now, we all know more now than perhaps we did 5 or 6 years ago, but there are specific needs for care homes, high dependency homes. And they really do need, I think, at this stage of the game to be putting that into their policy. The other aspects that concern me, about that, Chairman, is that there's a bunch of questions that seem to me to be asking for a review of their existing commitments. Do you have any comments to make on the scale of the shortfall that the two councils have already agreed to deal with the shortfall of housing in Birmingham and the Black Country HMA? And if we're required to meet housing shortfalls outside of Warwickshire, how should we do it? Frankly, these are agreed policies. I know Nuneaton and Bedworth decided that they wanted to try and opt out, but the relevance for North Warwickshire is that the agreement with Coventry was Nuneaton and I think Rugby. North Warwickshire and the areas here agreed to help with the Birmingham oversplit. Now, if they're now starting to question that to me is very, very significant. And frankly, I'm not sure that it is appropriate for them in this plan to start saying, well, should we do it? They've already signed up to it. I can understand questions about how do we do it, but not should we. And these questions seem to me to be as much about should we as how do we do it.
Okay.
And I don't think that's acceptable.
Are you referring to H43 on page 19?
H4, well, if you like, it starts at H4, H41, H42, H43.
Okay, so
Sorry, Chair, could we have the page numbers for
yeah,
each?
page 19.
Sorry, Jack, I'm trying as best I can to read it on my phone. It seems hard.
This electronic thing just does not work, does it? So it's page 20 of page 19 of Appendix 1.
Oh, I got it.
Quarter down the page, it starts H4, H42, H43. So let's pick up that first issue, which sounds, well, both important, but it sounds the more interesting one. So Dorothy, Mark, do you perceive, or do you take the same perception of Mark in terms of perhaps there being an interest in reviewing their commitments as they stand?
Thank you, Chair. That's probably a little bit beyond myself in terms of reading between the lines, because they've not actually proposed change, but I can understand the concerns that Councillor Simpson raises, perhaps because it's not clear. And from H41, perhaps it could be an element that we could add to the response. Do you agree? Yes, this is essentially an area of cross-boundary cooperation and active element for the duty to cooperate. And add something like, and the need to include consideration for future growth needs should be considered, or the need to address potential future needs should be part of this consideration. Wording along those lines, that would help.
I don't necessarily disagree, John, but I think if you ask a question that says,
do you
agree with the approach of contributing? You're inviting people to say, no, thank you very much, plug them somewhere else.
Okay. So can that, got you there, Jackie, do you want to throw in?
Yeah, well, just, I mean, there is a sense right from the beginning, if you read the first section of Appendix 1, QV31, where it says, where appropriate and agreed, this could include unmet need from neighbouring authorities. So you get that sense of pulling back from that stated commitment that's been made in the past. So you're left in a kind of, well, maybe so, but maybe not so. And that then follows through into the subsequent H paragraphs as well. And I thought what Councillor Simpson was saying, please could we have something a little bit stronger, reminding them of their former commitments around these housing needs and duty to cooperate.
Dorothy?
Yeah, I think when I read it that they had already had the commitment and it was the future needs. But I can see exactly, having reread it there, that how you've come to that conclusion, that you feel as if they're pulling back on what they've already agreed. So we will make it clear that they've already made that commitment in an adopted plan, and that we wish that to continue, and that we see that they're also a location that they should be catering for the next shortfall as well.
And specifically, Sharon, they reference the shortfall to 2031, which is the one that I think was the memory of the memorandum of understanding on.
Yeah.
You know, I agree that Birmingham has changed their numbers upwards, I think twice. But that, I think they're perfectly entitled to say, no, we're sticking with the numbers that we had way back when. But I don't want to labour the point. I think we're all on the same page.
Okay, well, let's just tidy this up. So we're going to make a feedback comment, stressing the need for them to clearly commit to the commitments that they've already made, and questioning why they are asking for clarification around. Do you agree? Now, Mark, just take me to the older person's housing need that you referenced.
H2-3.
Chair, could I just interject very briefly on that latter point, and just basically put in, because they have asked the question quite clearly, do you agree with the approach? And we could say, and we would disagree with any approach that did not continue to address the potential for future need within the borough. Yeah. That's basically saying it. You're applying for what you've done, keep it in. If there's anything else, we expect to continue it. And if it doesn't, we disagree with that approach. So we're making that, make that a bit stronger.
Yeah, finish the job.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair.
So it was on the previous page 18, right down at the bottom. Question H2-3, how should South Warwickshire best address the specialist needs
of older people?
I'm sorry, I don't know what their draft policy is, but I do think that's an essential and growing need. You know, we're all getting older. The needs of the elderly are becoming more addressed or more clear. And certainly what we're seeing is there is, if you like, I agree with the response. There is a need for a strategic allocation. But it's specifically, I think they've got to put in high dependency units as well as the blanket elderly people, because there is a real, across Warwickshire, an identified shortfall of specific accommodation.
Thank you, Chair. Just in response to Councillor Simpson, yes, this is actually a good opportunity to add information on that, because this is an open question. They are asking, there is no option. What they're asking for is what options are there. So it's more of an open season. How should South Warwickshire best address the specialist needs for older people? What suggestions do you have? So I'm more than happy to add the issue on high dependency units need to be included, and any other comments members might have, particularly on the elderly, because it is an issue. And
totally. We're all living longer, thank God, Michael.
And I think within that, we should specifically point them to considering healthcare provision when they are planting HDUs and what have you, because it will put additional resources.
Well, 106 healthcare provision.
Well, no, whichever way they address it, the experience I think we have seen is that HDUs, whilst they, if you like, should cater for their own demand, don't always do that, particularly in the specialist areas of healthcare provision, like mental health. And so quite often, I'm not being different or rude about this. Basic medical provision is probably catered for, but there are specialist needs which are not always obvious. And mental health seems to be, as ever, the underfunded, under-resourced orphan. And it particularly becomes problematic when they're not providing it at an early stage.
Interesting.
I don't know. I know officers have done quite a bit of work on that elsewhere, and I'm only sort of really pouting what you told me already.
Jackie, did you have to?
I mean, mine is just a kind of out of interest, really. How does land actually get identified for those high dependency units, and in particular units that cater for dementia and growing needs of, that part of the population? And is there any way of, requiring land to be designated in that way? Because reading our comment, it suggests that you can actually designate sites, which you can you?
Yes, you can allocate sites for any particular use if there's an identified need and there's evidence there. But also within the strategic allocations as well, you can also have a range of house types and accommodation, and and that type of accommodation, although it wouldn't necessarily be counted as dwelling houses, it's still a provision for the elderly that you can actually make within strategic allocations as well.
Good, Dave?
I was just going to say, I was just thinking about a couple of things that happened since I've been on the council. So down Albury, is it Albury Lane in Hartsfield? That's a site there. The company came forward with that to have that done, and I'm just now thinking of the potential for doing the development at Kingsbury Hall. We might have a need for an area, but it's the decision of the business that wants to build it there. So we're not saying, oh, build us an old people's home there or some other facility. It's whether a developer comes forward.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in the past, we've not tended to allocate a site for an elderly person's high dependency unit as such. But I think increasingly, as we are growing older, it is going to be an issue that we're going to have to address. In terms of, we have been working with the county council to actually find out the actual numbers for extra care accommodation on our strategic allocations. So, for example, on H4, it's likely that the number that we'd need on there is around about 100 units. So that's the sort of thing that the county would be asking for as part of that site. And it looks as if that might be a similar sort of number for the sites in Atherstone as well. So that's the sort of thing where we're trying to get that evidence together. And sometimes it's because when we produce the local plan as well, we know that there is an issue, but we perhaps don't have the exact details of it. And but the gentleman whose name I'm trying to remember, I can picture him, but his name's gone out to my head from the county council. We have had those detailed meetings already. Derek Sherwood, yeah.
But can I just say, Chair, you can't suddenly say, look at it, the council, we need 10 in Atherstone, 10 in Dordon, 10 in Boleswood. This sort of development has to be a collective, doesn't it? So it could have to be somewhere.
Yeah, it could be, and it will be. If it's a private developer, then it will be perhaps on an ad hoc basis. But there may be elements within the strategic allocations, especially, that we can perhaps suggest through the process, because as part of the local plan, we do say that the housing allocations, and particularly over, I think it's 100 units, should provide for a range of needs. And it's getting that evidence in as to, well, what are the needs of the local area, and then providing the appropriate accommodation out from that. It's not perhaps as precise as you're wanting it at the moment, but it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, right. A couple of interesting debates. Any more on housing allocations and specific needs for any group of residents?
Other than, I think you were going on, Chairman, to talk about gypsy travel allocation.
Well, I'm just covering all the ground we're taking slowly, Mr. Simpson.
Couldn't miss that one, could you?
Yes, no, Michael. So, gypsy and traveller and show people.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the second issue, I think it's now a third issue, actually, reading on, is the issue H6, which is how they expect to address or highlight options for dealing with pitches and plots for gypsy travellers and travelling show people. In that discussion within the actual South Warwickshire plan, they highlighted and made reference to the ongoing discussions Coventry Warwickshire wide in terms of how perhaps some strategic opportunities, i.e. we're talking a strategic site that serves wider than South Warwickshire's need, could be addressed, but they aren't specific to put that forward beyond what you're seeing here, which is options 6A, 6B and 6C. First of which identify a range of specific sites in sustainable locations of up to 15 pitches to be developed only for gypsy and travellers and show people's homes. H6B, require large developments of over 500 homes to provide a proportion of gypsy and traveller and travelling show people homes on the edge of the overall site. Or finally, H6C, rely on a case-by-case approach whereby planning applications will be assessed against a range of criteria, which would be what similar situation we have within the local plan, which is a criteria-based policy. In terms of our response, I've recommended both of the first two be included and considered. Avoid 6C because it's not robust enough, and that's our experience so far to address the needs. Show people is a bit difficult because they have very specific needs, and particularly if they're an active group in relation to equipment and siting. And often in other plan policies, they've been separated out from the overall. So that's why I've highlighted that as a difficulty to include. They did highlight that they didn't have any issues or any demand particularly from show people.
Interesting. Where do you keep your elephant when he's not on stage?
Or similar. So it's seen as less of an issue because there is such a low evidence of need in that area. But that is similar to our own circumstances. Hence, I'm a little bit ambivalent on how they're addressed. But from the point of two, consideration was they should include the first point, which is a specific size of up to 15 pitches. Now, we've taken a slightly lesser approach in terms of where our discussions are going forward, because we had, I think it was a range of up to 5 or 10, if I recall, when we were looking at it, because what we wanted to encourage was family pitches. A, they're the easiest to manage. B, probably the easiest to find. And they're the ones you tend to see on a regular basis coming forward to members through the planning system as planning applications. And that caters for family needs. But also because of the affordability issue, that will only deal with a limited proportion of the gypsy travelling community. So we're still left with potentials where unauthorised development or sites that we've currently got issues on where they are looking for sites to rent. So we do need to look at what opportunities could be provided. And that discussion has been had in the past, it was discounted because of resistance from the developers, stroke landowners being allocated, but also from the Gypsy Travellers community. I must raise that they didn't want to be put in, for want of a better word, cheek by jowl with the settler community. So circumstances where we are now, we need the sites. So if we have a strategic allocation, and in this case they're looking at developments of over 500 homes, to provide a proportion of those, similar to what you would do for affordable housing and for the issue you just raised on elderly, but also for gypsy and travellers. And I think that's probably a fair way of looking at it, because through the HEDNA, that's what that is trying to do, is identify all the needs and look for authorities to deliver sites that will deliver all the needs. That mix of tenures, mix of options. So that's where we were recommending.
Okay, members' views. Is it strong enough? Is it clear enough? David?
Can I ask? I'm just thinking of by the roundabout going into Polesworth. There's an allocated area there for 690 houses. Taylor Wimpey built 143. And over the road, somebody else built another 55 coming off of that roundabout. That's never going to be 500 homes, will it? Would it be the accumulative effect? Because ultimately there's going to be 2,000 houses going up to the A5. Is it the fact that will be two? But if they keep building 499, does that mean they never get to 500 houses? I just think I'm playing the game with the developer now.
Normally, Chair, what we do is we try and resist piecemeal development that's specific to avoid that. So they do that with affordable housing as well. So if you have a particular criteria that you deliver X number of houses or an X percentage on the following threshold, the classic one is recently when we used to have within this authority, we used to seek contributions for houses less than 10 dwellings. And we were generating between £500,000 and £125,000 per annum from fairly small Section 106 contributions, 7,000, 14,000, 25,000, 30,000 in one case. When the changes came in thresholds, specifically that you couldn't require Section 106s, and it had to be at 0.2 of a hectare or 10 dwellings. We got a glut of applications for 9 dwellings. because it falls below professional. And that's a small example of what happens in a big scale. Now, we do have quite clear strategic policies that we look at it as a whole so that we can avoid piecemeal development that avoids open space contributions and Egyptian travellers. So if it's in the policy and if it's well worded, you should be okay. But it is possibly worth making that point and saying for strategic sites, this should be made clear to avoid exactly that potential.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree a little bit with our officers here.
okay.
I need to disagree a little with where our officers coming from. So they're giving us three options. Identify specific sites. Have a more vague policy that says you look at doing it over 500 homes. That to me says not specific sites. And C, do it. And I'm shocked that they can even suggest don't do it. I think it has to be H6A. Identify a range of specific sites in sustainable locations to be developed for gypsy only for gypsy and traveller and travelling show people homes. I think 6B is watering it down for a group of authorities that frankly have not done enough in the past about providing for this section of society. And I genuinely am still shocked that they can try and rely on H6C, rely on a case-by-case approach. You know, it's just simply sticking their head in the sand and pretending the problem will go away. Unless they do 6A and identify a range of sites, they will still fail to meet the need. And that creates a problem for all the other authorities next to them and around them. My only other question on this is a suitable location selecting up to 15 pictures stroke plots. And I can't remember what the recent assessment for Warwickshire Authority said. I'm presuming that was 15. I think we should, in line with everybody else, say a minimum of 15. You know, and actually they should be addressing their historic need together with future need, and that may well be more than 15. I accept the point that, you know, the preference should be for smaller family plots, because from what I understand, that's what that community would particularly apply for. But if we do anything other than require them to have specific sites, frankly, I just don't think they'll do it, because, you know, identify, you know, 6B require large developments to have something on the edge of the site. Well, there's 1,000 reasons why that might not actually lead to delivery. And sort of do it on a case-by-case approach. Well, in theory, that's what they've been doing until now, and it's not done it. So it's got to be just 6A for me.
Okay, Jackie?
I want to agree completely with what Councillor Simpson has said about favouring 6A and not muddling it with an acknowledgement or a sort of nod of the head towards 6B in terms of our response. One thing I did worry around in some of this was the talk that we had about gypsy and traveller needs, and the fact that a lot of travellers are travelling and want a place to park temporarily, and quite a lot of the problems that we have of people parking, or these groups parking on our public places and green fields and so on, is because they haven't got anywhere else to go. And the only site that we did provide in North Warwickshire didn't have the kind of facilities that you would expect, even from a fairly basic campsite, from what I can understand. So I'm not sure what the difference between a pitch and a plot is. I'm not sure where the discussion at county level about the need for travellers to be able to park, however big the kind of groups that they get, and often they are bigger than 15, aren't they, if they gather, where that fits in their policy and their, you know, acknowledgement that they have land, and that needs to be thought about in the context of either a pitch or a plot. But that may be my ignorance about the gypsy and traveller policies thus
there
far.
are issues on, like around emergency stopping places. So there's pitches, there's permanent pitches, emergency stopping places, and is there another category?
There's the transit sites.
Transit site.
That can we would say from our gypsy and traveller needs assessment that the transit site could be an emergency stopping place as well. So there's some definitions there that are fluid, I would say, and can be interlinked or interused. I would say.
But could we add to the recommendation
Yeah,
or
easily.
the option feedback that we
Yeah.
like clarity around proposals of transit sites to ESPs? Can we also add into there a requirement for them to share their gypsy and traveller needs assessment?
Yeah, they're normally public anyway.
They're public anyway.
Yeah, they're public anyway. And they will have to publish them on their website, same as we do. Can I just clarify one point, Chair, though, on the recommendation? It perhaps is also an element of my lessening the reference to sort of objections to, because it's the issues and options way of looking at suggestion. When I said recommend mix of option, I wasn't trying to look at watering either down. I was actually asking, well, why not have both? So you have the requirement, and I'm understanding more than supportive of Councillor Simpson's. I went, right, let's say a minimum of 15 pitches. The family pitches was just our experience that was applying to, that's been the way we found it easy to do. But quite clearly, the more we can get, the better position we will be in to defend ourselves at appeal. But on the other, I didn't want, because we often felt that they were opting out, this is the larger strategic developers, that they were saying, oh, well, it's not going to be for want of a better word, a selling point to their development if they don't. But then they've been saying similar comments to us for affordable housing and other issues. So quite frankly, tough. It's a need identified, and perhaps we should be expecting them to deliver. But that's just my view, and I wouldn't want to lose the opportunity of saying, right, we've got 6A, but why can't we have 6B as well?
Okay, Jackie?
I think the problem is in their wording of H6B, because if it read, require large developments of over 500 homes to provide a proportion of gypsy and traveller and travelling show people's pitches and plots, and stop there. It's the issue of on the edge of the overall site that is. I mean, in terms of they could contribute to providing a gypsy and traveller show people's places or pitches and so on. It's that sort of sense that it's too specific in terms of what you're asking. You know, the Polesworth developers and others are going to be building these big estates to think about allocating some of their land for.
It's such a ludicrous proposal. You'd never see how it developed. I mean, can you imagine building a 500 home site and then sticking a traveller site next to it?
Well,
in terms of saleability.
Same occupying the community centre later, wasn't it?
Well, it almost feels as though they've written that with the tongue firmly in their cheek, giggling.
Maybe we could suggest a rewording of H6B.
Dorothy, you're going to advise us.
No, I can actually, as a planner, I can understand why they put the second option there. And that is mainly because when you do a call for sites, for gypsy and traveller sites, you get very few options coming back. And so when you've already allocated a large strategic allocation, that is an option to actually be catering for a different type of need of a traveller's pitch and not necessarily bricks and mortar. So from a planner's perspective, it is actually quite, because we don't get these other sites coming forward, that is an option to try and actually provide another way that need can be addressed. So I'm just putting that out there as a planner.
There's always an interesting side to it. Well, Mark?
Chairman, I don't want to close my mind to that. I can see that it could be an option. But for me, they have to do something they've never done before, which is identify these sites and to make sure they have provision. if they can find additional stuff within 6B, well, lovely. But fundamentally, they've got to address the requirement first, and they can only do that by firmly identifying a site. Now, believe me, I know just how difficult that's going to be for them. But they can't continue to have no identified sites. And yeah, I want to abundantly make the point to South Warwickshire, you have to do 6 A. If at the same time you want to do 6B, well, that's fine, but that's like stage 2. And actually, then for me, the other point is a much more human one. The accommodation needs to be in such a way that it works for the traveller community and for the settler community. And I think from what I may be wrong with this, but my expectation is an identified discrete site will work better for both communities, as opposed to almost this afterthought of shoving it on the back. Yeah, and you know what it's going to be. It's going to be round the back next to social housing terrace and all the rest of it. The way we see developers dealing with this, that's what will happen. I think this is a community that needs a discrete provision, and hoping they'll fit it into another development, I think is hopeful. So I don't want to sort of dash their hopes, but first up, they've got to make that provision on 6A. If they can do anything else, that's great. But
Michael?
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with that approach. It's firm, it gives a clear direction, and as Councillor Simpson said, it does put them on the spot, and does, I'm not going to disagree that we do look at any options from the planning side, as Dorothy said. That's primarily because of the difficulties of finding the site. So I think that's probably a straw, or it's not a straw that brought the can back. It's another string we were trying to clutch to keep our options open from a professional side. But in terms of the option response, I think that's probably more appropriate as Councillor Simpson.
Okay. You okay with that? And obviously we'll include transit sites in the feedback as well, some clarity. And just so when we look at 2,000 homes for H4, Dorothy, you're going to be coming forward suggesting a transit site and the Gypsy and Travel site as part of the development?
It isn't a policy in the local plan at the moment, but it's part of the Gypsy and Travellers issues and options paper. These things will have to be thought about and discussed.
Okay.
I want to remind you, Chairman, we're pretty close to having found or provided for all the sites that have been required in the plan period. So I would hope, Chairman, that Mr. Barrett isn't doing that, because we've already met the need.
David?
Being cynical now, because
No, don't bother with that then.
regardless of whether
You're going to say
we find a site for them, let's look at Glen Farm. They've found 60 sites for themselves because they'll just ignore everything that's gone on. So they will. You've got to do something about it, because they'll do it on their own anyway. No. I wanted to take a point up with Mike there. Because of some of the flooding issues that took place on the Bellway estate at Dairy House Farm, I've been involved with that, and I've got on quite well with one of the directors there, and then the site foreman on the Linden Homes, which is part of Kia. And he was saying to me, one of our problems here, because they've had a bit of trouble selling some of their houses, because too many affordables and too many social. It's 127 and 66 affordables. I said to him at the time, one of the problems is the way you laid the site out, because you actually made the wealthy site and the poor site, for want of a better description, in the sense that this is all affordable. So and to make it even worse, where my daughter lives on the Bellway site, 83 homes, 18 of which are social, all like the Black Death. They've got black doors instead of, so any social house has got a black door. So you come down the road, you know they're a council tenant. It's ridiculous. So they set themselves up to fail in the first place. So there's no point saying tough, because that general manager said to me, with some of the bigger houses, we have to discount quite a bit because they're social houses. That's a problem for the builder. I would imagine that the builders start seeing this, and the developers start seeing this, and they know they're going to have 15 pitches. And when you said you didn't know what a plot or a pitch was, please correct me. But if you look at Alvocate, there's a static and 2 caravans per pitch. That's 50 options for people to live in on that one particular site. And that's 15 pitches in fact, could be 45 caravans and the farms. And then because when you talk, and every site so far that we've seen about development and extensions, it's always been about the family. Well, the families are going to grow. The families are going to want to have their own thing. So even though no matter how big the site is, sooner or later, 2 boys or 2 girls, whatever, they move in there together, and the sites will naturally grow because of the family. So we can't ignore that either.
Yeah, we can't, and that is an issue. That's why the pictures and plots stroke is referred to, because we believe, and that was identified in the GTA that we had them taken, that there is there is capacity, that's the word, within existing sites. So if you have a standard best practice guide, it's not policy, it's best practice of static tourer and outhouse support, or sometimes 2 tourers. That doesn't negate, depending on the size of the pitch, the opportunity that there may be capacity within there to accommodate more. So another tourer or another static, and that would address part of our need. And that is, it will require very careful monitoring. The difficulty we often get faced is a similar situation with affordable, where the applicants effectively turn around, they're not affordable. They are available, but we can't access them because of cost, because they're rental or simple purchase. So we're always going to get that thrown back at us, just to be aware. If I can just respond briefly to the Dairy House Farm one. Yes, that is an issue that has, particularly in the last 20 years, highlighted. It partly, though, is the development industry's own fault, because previously planning policy was to pepper pot affordable housing within the general housing. So you couldn't differentiate, and you didn't, in broad terms, ghettoise affordable housing, which has happened. And that makes it difficult, because if you want the expensive house next to what is seen as the poorer quality affordable housing, that is going to have an impact on, inevitably, value and the willingness of people to purchase that particular property. So I understand that. That has always been a difficulty. Additionally, on top of that, we had our own difficulties with the pepper potting policy, which came from our housing department, which effectively said it's very difficult, shared ownership or affordable rent, if it's being managed by Waterloo or any of the other housing associations, for ourselves, if you're trying to visit and address and manage 50 properties spread over a 500 house development. If you've got all those 50 properties in one location, nice and quick, sort it out, manage it easy. And so there is a financial implication, inevitably, and it's that part of the element that has delivered and generated the circumstance. So
Create our own ghettos.
we either get increased cost or
We want integration, that's the thing. You don't want,
you do want
otherwise you will ghettoise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Michael, you've got the joy of Councillor Simpson.
Chairman, that comes into that official designation of cobblers, doesn't it?
What, the joy of Councillor Simpson?
Honestly, if you've got 50 houses spread across an estate of 500, it is no more inefficient or no less cost effective than if they're all sitting cheek by jowl. You know, I just don't buy that argument. I hear it regularly from housing associations. They want everything put together. But actually, the greater social good is an integrated, community that. I grew up in a small mining community, ex-mining community on the edge of Doncaster, and in Doncaster there's an area called the Five Estates. 3 council estates, 2 private ones, with a big road going through the middle, and there was no interaction between the different estates. It was absolute ghettoisation of both communities. I think we're trying to avoid that, because what we do here when we look at these is we do try to integrate these uses. And I think it is important that kids grow up with their neighbours, and whether they're rich, poor, social housing, private housing, whatever it is, they'll all go to the same schools. They'll all go to the same school. They'll play in the same playing field. They'll play on the same streets. I just think I don't buy this economic argument at all.
Good. Statement made. Moving on. Any more on gypsies and travellers? No.
Shame Jack Bailey isn't here. Right,
If the
Chapter
cameras
10.
were not on.
Thank you, Chair.
chapter 10.
The final issue, which I think is the fourth issue, or it might be the fifth, I don't know, I've lost train of it. Is to do with the reference to the 20-minute neighbourhoods. I'm aware this has raised some issues in the media, but also elsewhere in terms of what this actually means. But just to sort of preclude bringing my manager in dots to just clarify what's meant. In terms of the responses we put forward is that we generally agree because it's a sustainable approach.
Sorry,
and
Chair, which
sorry.
reference is it? Which page?
T1,
Is the-
page
27, and it is
T1.
T1.
Michael, just explain to us what a 20 or a 15-minute neighbourhood is.
I will defer to my colleague who has a far better idea of what a 20-minute neighbourhood is than I can obviously explain.
It's a concept that there's been there's more and more papers on it about making it easier to walk or cycle to a range of services and facilities. So it's looking at the walking distance of 10 minutes there, 10 minutes back, or 10 minutes cycling there, or 10 minutes back. So the idea is that you look to see how you can make places more sustainable and more within either walking or cycling distance. And that's basically what it's about. What you may recall is that we had a settlement appraisal and we have a list of all our 50 odd settlements, and we have the information on the service and facilities for each of those settlements. So what my team are looking at is to update that information, and then what we were going to do, we were going to then put that onto a GIS layers and to then see what this 20-minute neighbourhood, and in some places you might have heard of 15-minute neighbourhoods as well, is how that would affect the settlements in North Warwickshire. So in a rural area, it's assumed that it's not appropriate. However, I'm going to give it a go and have a look at it and see, because I think that there's merit in this in some point, because it actually, as people's habits are changing, the pressure to make sure that we're more active and healthier lifestyles and things like that. So there will be places that you'll never get to be a 20-minute neighbourhood. So like the Isle of Skye, you might never have places out there, but there is a good chance that a lot of our main settlements, even our local centres, but even a group of villages and settlements could potentially own 20-minute neighbourhood. So it is a concept, and a lot of the local authorities are picking up on it and taking it. It's something that we're just starting to have a look at, and it may be something that we put into a future plan, or it may be something that we might not.
So before I bring Councillor Simpson in, unsurprisingly, it's got a view. Am I understanding this correctly? So you're saying, or the policy is saying, it's facilities such as shops, medical facilities, community facilities that would be located so they would be in a 10-minute walk or a 10-minute cycle of all residents within that new development.
There'll be some services, like a hospital, that you wouldn't expect to be within a 20-minute zone. But then there may be GPs that you think, right, okay, there could be a medical centre of some sort for outreach provision. So
But you can't get an appointment until next Monday.
so it's not necessarily saying it's got to be that exact use. But it does mean that you would have access to a local shop, perhaps a cafe. And so it's just trying to make sure that we don't put everything into out of town places, which we've never done. We've never really supported that at all. So it's likely that most of our places, particularly our main market towns, are possibly on the way to being ideal 20-minute neighbourhoods. But when, for say, like Polesworth and Dordon, that we need to just think about that those on the outer edge of that development, how far is it then for them to go to a shop or something like that, and just trying to make sure things are just as accessible for them as it is for those that are right on the doorstep. It's more a concept, as far as I'm aware, and a lot of local authorities are starting to think about it, introducing subsequent policies trying to restrict traffic. I think Oxford City Council is trying to restrict the amount of traffic that goes into the centre. But at the heart of it, it's basically what happened during COVID, where streets were blocked off so that people could walk and cycle. So it's that sort of idea.
Excellent. Mark?
Sorry, Chair, could I just before Councillor Simpson?
You don't steal his thunder, Michael, for goodness sake.
I'm not seeking to, I'm just seeking to bring us back a little bit to the response on the issues and options.
Well, let's take Mark's point and then we'll go back to the response, because you never know, it might be a bit of relate to the response. Mark?
I think, Chairman, this is something that we and South Warwickshire, it is very fair to consider. My concern, though, is it's where policies don't meet together and conflict. And in some ways, I do see this as valuable in specific areas, particularly larger urban areas. In others, I think it's the triumph of hope over reality, because we do know that a lot of the neighbourhood areas that we tried to set up previously, the shops struggle to survive. They go from one problem to another problem, and we know that our small town centres are increasingly struggling to survive. And I think absolutely fine that we should review it and consider it, but it's got to be in the round of competing policies together. And, you know, without a doubt, a new housing development on the edge of a town can add to the attractiveness and viability of the existing shopping centres without necessarily trying to provide others. Now, I know on the one on the edge of Atherstone, we're seeking to promote Whittington, or the current development of Whittington, as a local service centre. There is a place for that. But, you know, I'm genuinely happy to look at it. But there's two sides to this particular coin. I have to say there's also the issue of is it a poor man's bike like mine, which is rusted, no brakes and hardly works, which will, you know, within 15 minutes will probably get to the end of the drive, or it is a supercharged, high-tech whiz-bang bike like Council Chambers.
Oh, wow, now you're speaking.
You get a long way.
Birmingham city centre is within 10 minutes cycle from Council Chambers. Michael,
Chair, thank you.
help me.
Wholly agree with that point, and to bring it back to the issues and options comment, I was trying to address that specific issue with the final sentence, or some people say my sentences are more paragraphs, but and maybe not worded as well as it perhaps should have been, but development opportunities may need to be predicated on, they've gone straight into it, infrastructure or service delivery provision, but we could include availability of infrastructure or service delivery provision, particularly around transport services and connectivity. So we're hitting the issue not only of the lack of cycle lanes, adequate pedestrian links and bus services, but as part of the proposals to help what is the issue really, it's all about the 20-minute neighbourhood, which is addressing sustainability and viability of settlements based on this 20-minute neighbourhood theory. our local plan, and I was coming at this response really from our local plan, that one of the things we really majored on was, if we're going to accept development, it has to deliver the infrastructure that's needed to sustain that. Comes on to what Councillor Simpson was saying. It's the sustainability. There may be elements that you can provide that individually on a site, a larger site, such as Winter Farm, or on a smaller, say, 300 or 500 house development, where it does it through contributions or linkages to. So provision of direct bus routes, direct cycle routes, pedestrian linkages, or even something on site that links to something nearby. So it was more that. I don't believe it's necessarily or it's achievable everywhere in the Warwickshire because of the circumstances.
Okay.
But if we're going to consider it, it's got to be on a realistic basis that to get it, the development has to address it critically, but also constructively and look at addressing it. We've had issues with this before. Actually now starting to come home as some of our larger estates, we would request fibre optic ducting. And that would be simple channels in the road next to the pipe that they're already laying. And we were always again told, too expensive, can't do, you haven't got fibre optics in North Warwickshire, you've got no intention of getting it in the next 5-10 years. So why do we have to provide it? And the bounce back from development control is you can't ask for it, you can't ask for it. Where's the evidence? Well, the evidence is there now that everyone's screaming for fibre optics in terms of connectivity. Yes, they've had COVID and working from home, but there's a lack of future proofing. So even in the circumstances where it's not necessarily clearly obvious at that point in time as an essential, it's got a clear direction of travel. And if the direction of travel is trying to make places more sustainable, more walking, cycling friendly, but also more service provision friendly, then
It's really interesting what you know, because we was in pre-planning, we were looking at the application for Langley Sue, which was 178 houses bordered on two sides by fields. And what was obvious looking at the site layout was the absence of a hall and the absence of a premises that would be a shop. And actually, one of the things that I think shone through in the pre-planning, that you were building a load of houses where nothing other than other houses were accessible to the people that lived on them. So there wasn't a provision for a corner shop or, well, like I say, the community hall, which I thought was interesting. So there must be a finite point at which you just have to have, whether it's 10 minutes walk or 5 minutes cycle or whatever it is, you have to have a policy which requires the provision in new builds of facilities. Else you're just going to build a community of people that don't go anywhere.
I think, Chairman, a key part of it as well is multi-use. Because, typically people will still try and zone in a place of worship and this and that and everything else. Quite often in these, I think facilities of the future, it's going to be one facility, whether some of it's a shop, some of it's a church or a temple, whatever it is. I think the future, whilst it'd be great to have all these facilities, the costs of maintenance and everything else will increasingly lead to joint use. We have a whole bunch of villages in North Warwickshire that struggles to maintain a church, struggles to maintain a village hall, struggles to maintain a shop, or even a shop between Goods and South Handley villages. If they were all together, actually the community would have a more focal point where they could come together and, if you like, share the costs of maintenance of all of this. So I am generally interested in these community, in this provision facility. But I think we have to have an eye to the economics of providing it in the future, where it's only going to get harder, I think, than it gets now, particularly if we add in biodiversity and carbon gains and all the rest of it. It's a more, if you like, forward-looking view rather than what our grandparents had.
Yeah, it's the difference, isn't it? If you were to summarise it, it's the difference between a place to live and a community.
Yeah.
And it's those shared facilities. Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know enough about the 20-minute neighbourhood concept. I mean, I haven't read any sort of policy documents about how you really you know, in terms of evidence, map out that 20-minute distance in time and whatever kind of means that you can travel around and during those 20 minutes. But I think that notion of a community, a place where it isn't just a commuter land, it isn't just a kind of dead village in the sense of all that people do is go in and out and to their homes, and there's nowhere in terms of common places that they can buy, go to shops or visit the doctor or worship or have a pub. You know, all of those things they were actually built into our mining communities. If you remember, shared paths and sort of facilities were part of the old coalboard estate. So they did have the vision then of what a community was about. But obviously, as time has gone on and developers have moved in, that sort of need to use some of that land for ensuring that sort of social inclusion element and public space is driven to a certain extent out. And I think, you know, if this 20-minute neighbourhood concept is one way of revitalising that sort of thinking and requirements on developers and, you know, planning applications, then I think it has to be a good thing. I mean, certainly in North Warwickshire, was it 80? We are the highest commuting area in the country in terms of car commuting. So, you know, and why is that? Why is it really? Whereas when COVID, I mean, the villages did resurface, didn't they? People did start to shop locally. They did walk locally. They did, you know, begin to realise that it was your local co-op that was sustaining and keeping them away from the queues of the big supermarkets and all the rest of it. So there is something about that need for sustainability. But I think Councillor Simpson's point about, in the end, it's the market that's going to decide what's economically sustainable, and you can't just, you know, drop in something that isn't going to work from an economic sector point of view. But I would have thought from a public sector point of view, there are certain obligations to make sure that, you know, it is possible to walk or get a bus or whatever to a healthcare facility that you might use on a once every 3 weeks basis, and if you're elderly, that it's actually possible to, you know, get your mobility scooter or whatever down there. So, I mean, you know, I think if you look at London Docklands, they built the whole of that without any healthcare facilities to start with, and that is like a kind of ghost town at times when you visit parts of what was built. So I think, you know, the principles that, you know, seem to me to be a good one, and I think the response that we've got here, you know, does favour, have a look at it and see what can be adapted and adopted as part of it, and all, you know, credit to them. If they want to include it in their local plan, then we can possibly learn from how they interpret that.
Dorothy, you've got, after me, you've got the honour of the last. So I just think it's something we need to look at, isn't it? Well, I'll tell you why, because I'm sitting here listening to Jackie and thinking about Baddesley. They've got two little shops that are used by the whole community. And you would, if you looked at it in planning terms, you'd never ever say those shops would survive. But they do. And actually they prosper. And it's understanding what the need is and understanding what we can do to encourage those facilities, because that Langley Zoo looked like a god-awful lonely place on paper. Anyway, Dorothy.
No, it was just to say that there is a report by the Town and Country Planning Association on 20-minute neighbourhoods, and if it's okay with you, I'll circulate that round to members so that they've got that.
Yeah, and then let's have a think about as we move forward towards the review of the local plan, how we include that. Oh, good. Any more on that? No? Okay. The last thing was an issue raised by Councillor Simpson, which was was it a landing strip?
Issue B6.
Yes.
B6. On page 30. The wild belt designation. And I'm intrigued by this. I don't know a great deal of anything. I can guess what it's at. It's almost akin to the last one. I think it's something I'd like us to understand more. Intrinsically, I'm drawn to it, but at the same time, I can see the disadvantages of it too. Because yes, I would love us to have more areas for wildlife, but we've got to set that against zero carbon and enough food production. So, yeah, I can see there are competing policies, but actually there must be a place for wildlife. The cheeky part of me, Chairman, wants to write back to South Warwick and say, yeah, we'd like to have wild belt designations too, if you would please stop bringing all your B18 in our fields. I think it's certainly something I'd like us to understand. And as you were saying before, in terms of trying to make neighbourhoods, to look at where we might go with that in the next situation on our plan, because I think it's an interesting idea and one I'd like to understand better.
Okay, good. Holly?
It was just to say that, yes, I mean, in our habitat biodiversity audit, it's very clear that there are lack of linkages between some of the sites. And I saw that this wild belt designations was like, I suppose, a posh way of saying, well, these will have the corridors between certain sites and certain places so that you're actually making a belt of them. So that's how I saw it. And yes, more than happy to look at it as in part of the review of the local plan.
I'm happy with that, Chair, but badgers have had the same walk for thousands of years. They're not going to know what we designated as the connectivity. So, it is important that we don't just plan it, we look at the reality of what needs to happen. But, generally, I'm all in favour of doing this, but it's got to be, everything we know has got to be as far away from human habitation as we can reasonably develop. Because what do we bring? Light pollution, without a doubt. Noise pollution, without a doubt. It's well known that, if you've got a dog, and I've got two, you're not going to get many hedgehogs around because they'll either get scared or get eaten. So I do think it's important, but we shouldn't be seeing this as, what do we do with the spare bit of land on the edge of a development site that's difficult to plant a house on? Because that's just not going to work.
Was it here? I can't remember whether it was in pre-planning or whether it was on Country Farm where the development had a load of hedgehog holes in the fences.
That was on Country Farm.
Okay, see, my Friday mornings and afternoons are merging with my Sunday evenings. It's becoming confusing.
Called age, Chairman.
I've got hedgehog holes in my fences, and the rats find them very, very convenient.
Right, Michael, any more?
Thank you, Chair. I haven't highlighted specifically any more strategic issues, but if there are any further points members wish to raise, I'm more than happy to add them to.
Right, so poor old Michael came in here thinking it was going to be a 10-minute bish bosh bash, and actually it's turned into yet another 1.5 hour session. Does anybody else have anything?
I quite enjoyed it actually, Chair, even if it was 1.5 hours.
Yeah, I think far better than watching repeats, of course. Okay, screen watch, there you go. New Greek life.
Chair, do you want to formally take a vote on the recommendation?
Yes, please.
I'll propose it as amended.
Okay. So, Councillor Simpson proposing as amended. Can I see a second for that? Thank you, Dan. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Good. In that case, then, let's thank you for your time, and I draw this meeting to a close. Take us off air, quick.
Thank you, Chair.
So where are we doing Solihull?
Well, good question, Mike. What are we doing this past the Solihull plan? It's like, God,
What's
that's so.
happening with the
I've
A5?
already upset Solihull, so I sound.
Oh, my.
Further comment.
Really?
Not only is Country Farm merging with Friday planning.
are eminently acceptable.
Jackie, we went and saw the minister in person to talk about the A5, and he said, it's not my problem if you need to talk to Sash Janet, the housing
Did you look a
minister.
bit small?
Your problem is the housing.
Oh, for goodness
Isn't it?
sake.